just now. Thank you so much, Joanna and Rebecca. The floor is yours.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much, Noah. And I think Joanna was going to start.
Uh-oh, she's muted.
There.
There you are.
I am delighted to be here, enriched by so much of this day that I have witnessed. What a marvelous idea came to you, Roshi Joan. And I am so grateful to be included in the voices that you are bringing to so many. So I'd like to say that for, just a second, let's load with that because it's hard for me to read. So for the last 40 years, I've been growing a form of experiential group work. It's called The Work That Reconnects. And it actually, one way to describing it is that it helps people tell the truth about what they experience is happening to their world. And it helps them find the motivations and tools and resources for taking part in the healing of their world. Now, at the outset, when we're getting underway, we help each other discern certain features of the present situation, which include 3 stories or versions of reality that are progressively shaping our world so that they can see them more clearly and choose which one they want to get behind. Now, these 3 are business as usual, the great unraveling, and the great turning, as we put it. So business as usual, by that, we mean you got to grow the economy. That means global corporate capitalism. Now, we also call that the industrial growth society, because its key feature is the necessity to keep growing the economy, which of course commodifies our earth. And also we include that for those nations that don't like to use the word capitalist, because though they come to resemble it in their need to compete. So many voices tell us the story of the necessity for economic growth. Politicians running for government posts, corporations, and the military, and the corporate-controlled media. Just a second. Yeah. Now the next is the great unraveling. And I love that term because not only does it refer to the unraveling of ecological, biological, social systems as we are commodifying them, but I like the term because systems, all of these don't just fall over dead, but they just gradually, as they're under assault, being mined and extracted and commodified, they lose their coherence, their integrity, their memory, how to keep on going. So that's the second feature of the state we're in. And the third story of our era is the transition to a life-sustaining culture. Now, I want you to know, and we emphasize this and demonstrate it, that this transition to a life-sustaining culture is a revolution in the magnitude and scope comparable to the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, or the industrial revolution a few centuries back. There are many ways to refer to it, but we've taken in the work that we connect to calling it the Great Turning. So seeing this trio, I'll put it simply, our work is to help us survive the first two stories and bring more and more people and resources into this third story, this great transition, this turning. Over the last couple of years, a number of us recognize that given the pace of the great unraveling and the destruction being wrought by the industrial growth society, we are heading toward economic and indeed social collapse. Our thinking and courage in thinking about collapse has been helped by the deep adaptation work of Jem Bendell and Deep Adaptation Forum, to say nothing of earlier work and studies by Pablo Salvini of France and Belgium and his company, whose books are only just now coming out in English. And since the, so we're finding courage to look at the possibility of collapse or even the likelihood of it. And since our world economy has proven incapable so far of cutting greenhouse gas emissions at all, it is now obvious that we cannot avoid a climate catastrophe. We had been assuming that the great turning to a life-sustaining society might be able to come first or to forestall such a collapse. But now we've come to see it, that the great turning is more like a vision and a commitment within us that can help us survive the collapse of the industrial growth society and keep on going. And the motivation and the skills that we gain in the work that reconnects will serve us here in providing perseverance, inspiration, trust. In that case, in a way, I think the great turning becomes something more internal, like a certain, almost like bodhicitta, which is the bodhisattva's determination to serve the welfare of all beings, like a flame in the heart. So now, with the likelihood, or indeed possibility, but I'll say likelihood of economic collapse and climate catastrophe looming, we can sense that we are in a space without a map, that we're on shifting ground, where old habits and old scenarios, all previous expectations, all familiar features no longer apply. It's like we're unmoored, cast loose. In Tibetan Buddhism, such a place or gap between known worlds is called a bardo. It's kind of frightening. It's also a place of potential transformation. As you enter the bardo, there facing you is the Buddha Akshobhya. His element is water. He is holding a mirror, for his gift is mirror wisdom, reflecting everything just as it is. And the teaching of Akshobhya's mirror is this: do not look away. Do not avert your gaze. Do not turn aside. This teaching clearly calls for radical attention and total acceptance. Well, for us right now, it's pretty clear who's holding up Akshobia's mirror. COVID-19. It's come on us fast. We knew nothing of it just a short while ago. But right away, it made us stop. It made us stop to take in what the mirror reflects. It made us stop. We've been so busy and distracted in our different versions of the rat race that we couldn't pay attention to our actual situation. We have to stop our rushing in order to see who and what we are. This teaching of COVID-19 reminds us again that apocalypse, in its ancient meaning, connotes revelation and unveiling. Look at what, it's easy to see what it has revealed and unveiled. Right away, the first days, it revealed our failed healthcare system. At the same time, it revealed our utter interdependence when facing a pandemic so contagious. Right away, without anybody preaching from a pulpit, we could realize that we can't be healthy unless all are healthy. Our need to prioritize our collective well-being rose right up to the surface. Remember that? Especially within our country, which is one of the most hyper-individualized countries in the world. Patterns of contagion showed us pretty soon what we most need to see. The nursing homes, where the aging are warehoused. The meatpacking industry, so dangerous. So to the crowded workers, so cruel to the animals, so costly to the climate. And right away, right after the heels of that, the prisons. They rose into our view. Prisons where millions are locked away, now becoming petri dishes of contamination. And COVID-19, holding up its mirror wisdom, laid bare the fault lines of racial inequality in our society and the disproportionate impacts on Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. Remember when we heard 60% of the cases are African American? Thanks to pre-existing conditions, due to inequities in healthcare and environmental racism. And on top of that, just 4 weeks ago, can you believe it? Just 4 weeks, the killing of George Floyd has not only revealed the racism and brutality of our police culture, but inflamed unparalleled protests, sweeping the country and going so far as to call for the defunding and indeed the abolition of police departments and police unions. Here, in what I say again is the most hyper-individualized country in the world, many of us are discovering and seeing this others discover a new solidarity in our utter determination to move beyond the sick racism we've inherited and sustained. And in this uprising, we're inspired by the courage, creativity, and perseverance of the demonstrators, bringing along with them so many civil servants, members of city councils and police departments. A New York City Council member I heard yesterday speaking on the passage of the Council police reforms, dramatic changes within the police department that he acknowledged they had been working on since Eric Gardner's asphyxiation by the police. I can't breathe, he cried, as did George Floyd. And he said, but somehow we were preparing these, but we just hadn't gotten, he said, but I cannot, it's no time for my giving excuses, because it is clear now that this is a time of reckoning. Reckoning. So it's no wonder that the Bardo was seen as a place where the unknown, even the inconceivable, can happen, and where you can be changed forever. Now, having looked at that, I want to take a moment, the rest of my time, to look at, because in the coming years, we're going to all be facing great hardship and chaotic conditions. And so we're willing, I sense from this day together and my work with the that we're ready for that. But here are some things that can help. And let me offer them to you in describing some aspects of the work that reconnects. So let me start with what is definitive for many of us. And first, let me just say, I don't have a number of the people's doing the work that reconnects. We're not an organization even. It just spreads. We have a network. We have some books. We have contagious practices. And, but we have spread to every country in the Northern Hemisphere and down in many in the Southern Hemisphere too, in the global South rather. And in each one, it is affirming, interesting enough, people's own indigenous native traditions as they find impetus and understanding for moving toward a life-sustaining civilization in spite of the destruction made by the global corporate capitalism, the industrial growth society. Anyway, the spiral of the work is definitive of it, and it's like a circle, but it repeats itself, and to keep on going so you can, but each turn of the spiral, which can happen in a workshop or many times in your life, it becomes something that helps sustain you and move you forward. There are 4 stations in that spiral. And they're gratitude, and then there's honoring our pain for the world, then there's seeing with new eyes and going forward. So we have found it in hard times that there's nothing like gratitude for starting with. It grounds you. It's not surprising that every single religion and spiritual path that we know of seems to have started with praise and gratitude. And what it does for us in this Bardo-like time is it grounds us. And we feel our feet on the soil. We feel that we're part of a living planet, and it's our good fortune to be here with her, the living earth, at this moment of such great trial and tribulation and possibility as well, and huge, humongous change. And in gratitude, you already are peeled away from things that addict you to the consumer culture, because you know what keeps you going, and you don't need the things that are marketed to make you feel good. You know what you have. You are here. You are with the Great Mother. You are with each other. Where else would you want to be? So gratitude grounds you so that you can then move into the next station, which is honoring our pain for the world. Not pathologizing it, which is a temptation for us, which makes it very rewarding. The grief and outrage we feel can be so rewarding for the big pharma and their billion-dollar earnings. No, it's not to pathologize, but to embrace, to honor and respect. Now, we've talked quite a bit, I've heard today, about grief. This is more than that. Grief, yes, of course. And fear, the dread. Grief, yes, and the anger, the outrage. Oh, that's good to be able to express. Grief, yes, and the sense of insufficiency and powerlessness. Who, me? What can I do? And in the Truth Mandala, that is a feature of our work that has spread very widely on its own, sometimes just on its own. We have symbols for these four within the mandala. And we also bring forward, as we invite people to come in and express and contend with them, their tantric sides. For grief, the tantric or source side is love. We only grieve what we love. To meet your fear, you need such courage. Its tantric side is bravery and courage, etc. Oh, for outrage and anger, you might be wondering, what's the source or tantric side of that? It's passion for justice. So each of these, and insufficiency or powerlessness, that one, oh me, I'm not up to it, I'm just a little, is that that sense of lack is turned into the newness, is tantric side of the emptiness from which the new can arise. So this is, I have benefited so greatly from this work. So I am grateful to call it to your attention as we go forward into times that are waiting for us, that are chaotic and trying. And after that, what we come into, because we find then that as we encounter the grief and rage and fear, that this is actually causing us to reach out more and to actually experience our larger identity. In every one of those, if you were paying attention, every one of them widens our sense in widening circles. And we, in the work, use these widening circles to extend our relevance and our unique importance right now at this point through space and time. And so we do a lot of role playing at this part of the spiral. We experience and play with our solidarity with more than human beings. Maybe some of you have already taken part in a council of all beings, where you move beyond your soul identification with your human identity, as if stepping out of shoes that are too tight, and allow more than human beings to speak through you. Or in your identity in the presence of the past and future generations, because this moment with our living earth, this culminating time for the past, the ancestors. Every ancestor is here with us now in what we're facing. Don't doubt it. Use it. Open to it. And the future generations as well. One of my teachers, nuclear scientist, Gray Nunn, Rosalie Bertell, said, every being who will ever live is here now. Where? In our ovaries, in our gonads, in our DNA. They are here with us now. What a beautiful, beautiful calling we have to be able to play with them and giving them a chance to life. I think my time is up, so I just want to call your attention to places you can look for resources. My book, Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy, that's the subtitle. Coming Back to Life, manual on the work that reconnects. And then a very new book, A Wild Love for the World, which Stephanie Kaza edited, describing this work and its characters in the voices of some 35 contributors describing what it has brought them to see and to do. So I close with gratitude and being able to share this moment with you, my dear fellow journeyers. We're so lucky in a way to be alive right now. Would you want to miss it? We're so lucky in a way to have each other and teachings of the ancestors and the company of the future.
Oh, Joanna, thank you so much. Your prophetic voice has inspired us and guided us for so many years. And as your student and friend, and also co-conspirer, I want to say, seeing you sit day after day in the charnel ground, and to see you also recognize that you were born for this time. So thank Buddha, you made it this far, and I look forward to walking the road with you for years to come, my dear friend. Thank you. And Rebecca, we've walked the roads too, of the high Himalayas, of the Sangha.
That's true. Oh, yes.
So.
Oh, yes, blessed sister.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, listeners. Deep bow to the places, people, movements, and crises that taught me, and to the great women in this program I'm honored to follow, and to the climates, our activists around the world, from the Arctic to the South Pacific. But I should probably interject, I am a city person. Because of the big party in my neighbor's backyard, I'm in the front room where there are currently explosions and car alarms. So, but it's all good. Welcome to San Francisco. But welcome also to this most extraordinary moment in which to be speaking about these things. One that I think is hopeful not in the sense of easy or safe or pleasant for a lot of people, but full of extraordinary, unimagined possibility. To get to hope, I want to peel away hopelessness, the arguments that too often surround our actions and conversations. Hopelessness has many champions. One is the status quo and those who benefit from it, who often insist that the past was just like the present and the future too must be just like the present. They resist change by denying it as a possibility. It's a voice of amnesia or an attempt to enforce amnesia because change is a constant and climate, chaos, Buddhism, history, all teaches the first lesson, impermanence. Those who benefit from the present want the future to resemble it, but we are all here because we know this version of the present is destroying the future. Change has sped up in the current moment in wonderful and terrible ways. The climate that was so stable for 10,000 years is changing faster and faster. The pandemic has changed everything about how we live, and the uprising against racism is changing society and the collective imagination, civic budgets, laws, and the public landscape. I often think of these times as akin to a spring thaw. It's as if the pack ice has suddenly melted and broken up. The water starts flowing again. Boats can move through places they could not during winter. The ice was the arrangement of power relations that we call the status quo, or it's as though the placid river in which things seem to change slowly and predictably as they flow across some flat landscape suddenly reaches a precipice, and suddenly we're all in the waterfall, the white water in which it's harder to see, churning and turbulent and full of unanticipated change. There's no denying that these three things, the climate crisis, the pandemic, the racism prompting the uprising, are first of all disasters, but they contain in their turbulence the promise and possibility of changing the long placid disaster of the status quo, including the age of fossil fuel that has poisoned us and our politics and so many other living things. The very oceans and the sky that has rewarded the rich while punishing the poor, expanding human impact while shriveling the space for the non-human, and perpetrating white supremacy across the globe. I was so impressed by Hop Hopkins, as quoted by, I think, Christiana earlier, talking about how there wouldn't be climate change without thinking it was okay to destroy some places, which wouldn't be okay if you didn't think those people didn't matter, which wouldn't be okay if it wasn't for white supremacy. It's a beautiful connecting. Disasters and upheavals are crash courses in Buddhism. Suddenly we live in the transformative moment, recognize what that great Bodhisattva, Martin Luther King Jr., called the inescapable network of mutuality that ties us in a single garment of destiny. It vividly immerses us in the reality of impermanence and the consequentiality of our actions, that what we do matters. Often we experience with this a sense of mortality that makes life more precious and love that makes us more connected to those around us. We find new roles and in them find a new sense of power to do the work that's needed. We detach from material things and attach to each other more strongly. Often people find within themselves in these crises an unexpected capacity for mutual aid, improvisation, heroism, generosity, invention, self-transformation. The question that I was left with after I studied disasters deeply for my book, A Paradise Built in Hell, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster, was not why disasters shake us awake, but why it's so hard to stay awake. And so perhaps Buddhism, as the practice of awareness and awakening, is there to keep us in the mindset of disaster, not as loss and destruction, but as impermanence and interconnection and possibility, and the significance of all our actions. Hope for me is not optimism. Optimism, like pessimism, is a seductive enemy of hope. Both, both optimism and pessimism assume they know what will happen, and since they claim that it is inevitable, it requires nothing of us. We so often hate and fear uncertainty so much we will stuff its spaciousness full of all sorts of false certainty. But hope knows that we, with our choices, our action and inaction, are creating the future as we go. A tapestry not yet woven, as Wendy Johnson called it this morning, in words that echo King's single garment of destiny. And this afternoon, Christiana reminded us that it's a garment we're already co-weaving. Hope requires much of us, and if people reject it, sometimes they do so to reject the responsibility that comes with hope, as well as the uncertainty. A third opponent of hope is the familiar assertion that ordinary people are powerless, that they don't matter, that they have no role to play, that their lives are insignificant and meaningless. You can't change anything is an insistence that the you in that sentence are nobody, nothing, defeated before you begin, see what might as well not bother. It obliterates the histories of how people coming from the margins and the shadows, people who were supposed to be nobody, have changed the world again and again, are doing it now, magnificently in so many ways. We are afloat in two great tides of change this spring, to throw out a third aquatic metaphor. The first was the pandemic, in response to which so much of what we were assured was impossible has already happened. The pandemic is, first of all, of course, terrible, bringing sickness and death, exhausting labor for medical and other frontline workers, disruption for children whose schools suddenly stopped, and those who lost their jobs and incomes. It has brought poverty and hunger and fear and loneliness and anxiety. But it gave the lie to those who insist that nothing can change, that we must keep doing things the way we have been doing them. So many things stopped that we were told could never stop. Production, consumption, travel, circulation, so that carbon emissions suddenly fell 17% in a matter of weeks. We who have been told there is no money to pay for the transition to a post-carbon economy have seen trillions of dollars pulled out of thin air in the USA alone. Never again do we have to accept the argument that change is impossible. But what has been most moving about the pandemic was and is the action of billions taken on behalf of those around them, strangers as well as loved ones, as people closed their small businesses, came home from work, put on masks or made them, withdrew from circulation. The compassionate generosity of withdrawal should be recognized and honored. Withdrawal, as the divestment movement, first for South Africa, now for climate, has taught us, can be powerful action. And I learned long ago that environmental victory often looks like what doesn't happen. The river that was not dammed, the forest not cut down, the mine that didn't open, the coal plant that wasn't built, the illnesses not created from the poisons that were not spread. And so this withdrawal to protect others, this colossal stopping of human life as the non-human went on, was such a generous gesture of love and capacity to make change when we feel its urgency. So the other thing that we're in the midst of is the uprising that began less than a month ago in response to the public murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It's important to acknowledge that this was not a true beginning, but an escalation and amplification of an insurrection against American racism as old as the Europeans' arrival here. Perhaps the pandemic loosened up expectations of what was possible, and certainly things that we were told were impossible began to happen fast. The City Council of Minneapolis itself voted to disband the police department and reinvent public safety and peacekeeping as something that more truly deserves those names. Cities around the USA have actually defunded their police departments in recognition that policing has at best been an expensive failure. but more truly a war against the non-white by untrustworthy armed gangs with a propensity for killing as a first resort. But more than that happened. Statues came down, and not just in the USA. Statues of slave profiteers and colonizers came down in Europe. Protests in solidarity happened all over the world. I've counted 10 statues of Columbus brought down in the USA so far, along with statues of the conquistador Oñate in New Mexico, at least 2, and the colonizing priest Junipero Serra here in California, also at least 2. Because this is first of all about affirming that Black Lives Matter, but it's also more broadly against white supremacy. And it recognizes what people sometimes cluck their tongues and deny. That symbols matter, words matter, names matter, flags matter. All these statues were insults to the people who had to live with these reminders of their own silencing, dehumanization, and annihilation. And it's been such an extraordinary moment for me personally. Though I like to think I've been doing anti-racist work for a while, there's so much I hadn't thought about enough, and so much I've learned in the last month. We have these practical changes, we have these symbolic changes, but also so much of the transformations that matter are interior, transformations of the imagination, of consciousness, that are crucial to public change. Matthias Lehmann of the US youth-led climate group, the Sunrise Movement, wrote a few weeks ago, "As climate activists, we imagine a world that looks nothing like our own, one where we have stopped climate change by transforming our whole economy. If we believe we can win a Green New Deal in our lifetimes, we can also envision a world without racism and white supremacy in our lifetimes, and commit to making it happen." One of the beautiful things today was how people have articulated how connected those two goals are, in fact, how inseparable they are, how you can't ignore the one to pursue the other from either direction, not as a climate activist, not as an anti-racist activist. I've talked at length about this moment because it gives us hope for the future, and because the way changes we might have thought impossible or that would at least take decades have happened in days and weeks this spring that's just turned into summer. We cannot count on sudden upheaval, but we can't dismiss it either. Perhaps I should pause a moment. I hope you're all admiring the black swan behind me. It's by a developmentally disabled artist named Selena Perez, who's part of a wonderful project called Creativity Explored in San Francisco. I love it because it's beautiful and because of the magical circumstances I found it, but also because many of you know a black swan is an event that is utterly rare and unanticipated, unpredictable, yet tremendously impactful. And so I live every day with this reminder that there are black swans and that we never know when they will appear. And so we are living, I think, this spring in the midst of a great flock of black swans. And they can give us the confidence. Did you hear that explosion? They can give us the confidence that we don't know what will happen next, which is good news, because nobody saw this uprising coming. Nobody thought we could change so much so fast. And I hope it's a template, at least for confidence, that the climate movement will have its black swans in moments like this. I think of the meaningful response to the climate crisis as composed of 3 sectors. There are the scientists telling us what is going on around us and how our actions have consequences and some of the things that we need to do. There are the engineers who have created new technologies and improved old ones, notably giving us the means to leave the age of fossil fuel truly behind by making wind and solar affordable and effective in ways that were almost unimaginable only 20 years ago. A seldom remembered revolution, as huge, as profound as the Industrial Revolution. And there are the activists and organizers demanding and implementing responses to the terrifying data from the scientists and the magnificent possibilities from the engineers. So much has changed for those of us who've been following this for a while. Only 10 years ago, the climate movement seemed to me to be small and polite and mild. And it's grown and changed so much to become robust, fierce, brilliant, intersectional, strategic, allied with other movements, articulating the necessary business of how it's all connected as it does its work. And though there's so much yet to be done, I think we can also get confidence from how much has been done, how profound the transition is. I looked at a bunch of headlines from the last few months of how the UK went for 18 days with no coal power for the first time since the Industrial Revolution. How coal power, which once gave it almost all its energy, is now 1%. How in Texas, I believe wind power is going to outstrip coal power soon. How Scotland is now 100% renewable electricity, producing far more than it actually uses, enough to also power the north of England. And just the amazing things that have happened. I don't know how many of you loved it as much as I did, but and I'm going to get the language wrong, but when the price of Texas crude futures dropped to negative $37 a barrel in late April, whoever thought that would happen? It was a sign of how fragile and vulnerable the fossil fuel industry is, how collapsing it is. Noah read an old biography for me. The new one says I'm on the board of Oil Change International, which analyzes how to defeat the fossil fuel industry particularly. And the COVID crisis has brought it to its knees and made it crumble in so many ways. As I said when Trump was elected, Schadenfreude is hope for all living beings. When it's the destroyers you have Schadenfreude about, I give you all permission to have it about the fossil fuel industry, because it's good for them and the people who profit for them to crumble. It's good for every living thing for them to end. So, but still we know we have done so much has changed, but we're still not doing nearly enough to meet the demands that the climate makes of us. But we know what's needed, and on many fronts the change is underway. And what's most significant that I was first reminded of in the Great Climate March of 600,000 people in New York in 2014 is that the only obstacles are political. We know what to do. We have the capacity to do it. All we need to do is defeat the political champions of the status quo and the fossil fuel economy. So they just want, ooh, did you hear that explosion? They want, and now it set off another car alarm. They know that their termination, their death is inevitable. They're only delaying it because they want every last drop of profit. They want to sacrifice the deep future for short-term profit for the few. But the possibilities are there if we pursue them with all our hearts, all our wisdom, all our strategy and creativity and resources. I'm old enough to remember that the Berlin Wall was going to stand forever. The Cold War would never end in our lifetimes, that the US would never elect a Black president, that wind and solar were never going to be cost effective or adequate to supply our needs. Peace was impossible in Northern Ireland. Same-sex marriage rights would never be granted in any country, let alone the 29 that have. That women would never be priests and rabbis and imams in many faiths. That the powerful men committing sexual abuse would never, any of them, be brought to account. That the conversation would never change. I was in Paris in 2015 watching Christiana do her amazing work. But on the day before the climate agreement between almost 200 nations was reached, people confidently assured me there would be no agreement. Conventional wisdom is often failure of imagination and wisdom. Nobody foresaw Black Lives Matter or Greta Thunberg or the Green New Deal or the great indigenous movements of the last 30-something years in South as well as North and Central America, or so many other forces that have emerged out of the shadows and the margins in recent history. We can't assume that more will come forward, but we can't write them out either. But what I want to end by saying is that The impossible is what we already live in. Things we have all been told are impossible. If we're not white, if we're not male, if we're not straight, if we're not cisgender, quite possibly the lives we're leading were things we were told were impossible. I know that's true for me. And any backward glance, because the future is in daylight as the past is in daylight as the future is in darkness, let's just see how often the impossible comes to pass, that the black swans keep coming. There's one last enemy of hope I want to end with, and that's perfectionism and Puritanism that says we can't do this because we can't do it perfectly. We shouldn't bother trying to protect things because we can't save everything. And this is something I learned from Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, when 80% of the city went underwater, not only because of a somewhat natural climate-fueled disaster of a hurricane and windstorm, but because of the deeply unnatural disaster of economic and ecological injustice, bad infrastructure, and the profound racism that in a mandatory evacuation left so many poor people, mostly Black, behind. The day after Katrina hit New Orleans and the city went underwater, there was a traffic jam of people hauling their boat trailers to the flooding, and people all over the city who had boats were already in their boats. And what each of them said was, I can't rescue everybody, but I can rescue somebody. And that is so worth doing. I will risk my life. I will fight the authorities trying to keep me out. I will plunge into the great unknown to see what I can do. In a way, everything is New Orleans. We can't rescue everything. We can't make it 1650 or 1950 again. We can't make it anytime soon, the 313 parts per million of carbon dioxide that were in the atmosphere when I was born almost 6 decades ago. But there's great work to be done. And the difference between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario is profound. And it means many human lives, many species, many places, many dreams, many hopes, many possibilities. That's what we're here to do. And hope is one of the fuels that gets us there. And I want to end, I know I've sort of ended a few times. I'm going to end finally with the founding words of Black Lives Matter from Patrisse Cullors several years ago. Because also I think some of you might be saying, but isn't hope cheerful and peppy and happy and kind of ignoring how terrible things are and how profound racism is and how much suffering there is? And so they wrote all those years ago that the purpose was to provide hope and inspiration for collective action, to build collective transformation, rooted in grief and rage, but pointed towards vision and dreams. I think that's a possible place to be and a good place to be, a place where many are, many should be, and a place entirely compatible with the hope that we can do these things that need to be done. So thank you all so much for listening. I look forward to the conversation.
Rebecca, thank you. Truly. I want to, on the heels of your extraordinary words, to invite Christiana to begin our concluding reflections. Christiana?
Well, thank you for the invitation, but the response for me is impossible. We have just been so showered by both Joanna and Rebecca, by such love and such depth and such wisdom and such eloquence that it's a very difficult moment to follow. So let me just begin by expressing gratitude. Gratitude to the two of you for, I'm gonna get all tear-eyed, for so many decades of such profound work and such obstinate, determined walking into the darkness to find the light, for having done that for yourselves and for showing us how to do it. So let me start with deep gratitude. for both of you. And for you, Roshi Joan, you're also included in that basket of wise women who we're all so blessed and honored to be with. It's very difficult to express anything other than gratitude. But let me try to put a context to everything that we heard from Joanna and from Rebecca. And the context is one of human evolution. As we know, we have abandoned the Holocene, a geological period that was 10 to 12,000 years only. It could have lasted much more. And it was the time in our history of this planet, much longer history, 4.5 billion years. But it was the very short wink of an eye in which everything was pointing to well-being, or could have pointed to well-being. And unfortunately, we didn't realize what we had. And in the 50s, we started messing that whole up. And we therefore exerted incredible force that we humans had never had to catapult us out of the Holocene and into the Anthropocene. And as we all know, anything that we read or understand about the Anthropocene is all very bad news. Anything that you look at in the Anthropocene, it doesn't matter what factor you're looking at, it's all very, very negative. However, since it is a geological era, and we know that geological eras are not short, they are long. So from the 50s into now, we have 70 years, which from a geological perspective is only a wink of an eye. I would argue that the history of the Anthropocene has not been written. We have only barely picked up the pen and done so irresponsibly. But these conversations, like today's conversation during the whole day, and the work that all of you do, is the ink with which we will write a very different story for the Holocene. I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning if I weren't confident that we have everything it takes to write a very beautiful story of human understanding and human depth and human expansion. And one that takes into account all living and sentient beings on this beautiful planet. So to the great turning, yes, I understand that there are other stories, but I would not be able to understand if we made a choice different than focusing all our energy, all our love, all our commitment to the great journey. Because it's the only one that we can responsibly and with integrity hand over to everyone else who will follow us.
Christiana, thank you. I would like to invite Kriti now to reflect.
Oh, thank you so much, Roshi Joan. I am just blown away by Christiana's tears even as she spoke of the hope. Uh, uh, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. We are on this precipice. Um, the phrase that comes to me in all of this, we have everything we need to go forward, and yet we are at this point, we don't know where we'll go. And the frame that I have held is, we can create islands of sanity in a sea of chaos, even if we cannot save everything. It goes back to what Rebecca was saying. We cannot save everyone, but the boats are ready. Let's go. So the phrase I would like to leave people with is islands of sanity in sea of chaos, so that we can pass on to future generations set of values and frameworks that, you know, we do this seventh generation practice with Joanna Macy. I would love to hand over those practices and values to the seventh generation, even if we don't save everyone. But we have to take great care about the most vulnerable. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Kriti, thank you so much. Diana, dear Diana.
Well, the first thing I want to pass on is the words of gratitude from the Q&A. Many people are thanking everybody, all of us. They're very moved by Joanna and Rebecca and Christiana, and I'm glad that people feel as though they've been moved by this group. For me, this has been a different day. I spend most of my time reading scientific papers and having scientific Zoom meetings where we don't talk nearly as deeply as this group has been doing about the meaning of what we're doing, or the intersections with the crisis of racism or COVID. So for me, it's been very important to re-widen my horizon, and I'm going to spend the next week writing the curriculum for my course in the fall, and there's a lot I'm going to change because of being here today. So thank you.
Thank you, Diana. I'm going to ask Stephanie if you will reflect. Stephanie.
I'll add my gratitude to everyone else. I feel I've been held in a loving and brilliant space all day long with some wonderful minds and remarkably articulate speakers. I want to listen to all of you again and feel the capacity to say clearly what's going on. This kind of witnessing is so powerful, and our voices are so needed, and to be clear is a real gift. So I feel I'm taking away great admiration and inspiration from all of you, and a lot of homework. And as a professor, I expect to ask people to do homework and to do it myself. So there is no shortage of things, but I will say the caliber and quality of writing and speaking that's coming out today, particularly the people of color voices, it is poetic and so heartfelt and so embodied and so beautiful. I just want to listen. So that's what I've taken from today. Thank you all so much.
Stephanie, thank you. Jane, are you? Let's see if Jane is there. I see her screen.
Yeah, I'm here. And I'm deeply moved, and I can't wait to go back and look at it on the website now. all over again because it was a lot to take in. And I'm so grateful that I was part of this. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of it.
Thank you, Jane. And I just want to also say I was so grateful that you asked me to come to DC and to get arrested. It was a great honor to find myself in that warehouse with you and Gloria Steinem and such a fantastic group, primarily of women, and to take a stand of speaking truth to power. And I had such an interesting experience in the police transport vehicle, realizing that that vehicle had been designed very intentionally to humiliate and subjugate. And as I sat there in my Zen robes, crammed into that tiny space because that vehicle was compartmentalized, so only 3 of us could be in a tiny compartment. You were in another compartment. I tried to imagine what it would feel like had I been a person of color. And the terror when the doors were shut and we were plunged into darkness from being in this very antiseptic kind of environment with this white glazed interior. Suddenly, in the thick of darkness, the ceiling canted so that you were bent over in a posture of humiliation and subjugation. And I knew you or Greenpeace would get me out of jail. I had that kind of confidence, but also it gave me the opportunity to do perspective taking, to realize, you know, thousands upon thousands of people hauled away to hell for the rest of their lives. And to understand that we have a moral obligation to transform the views in our society that have us not only subjugate human beings, but also subjugate this earth, which she will prevail long past our ending. But we have, in a certain way, a moral imperative to end the subjugation in our time. And I learned so much, Jane, in that experience with you and being with Dolores de la Huerta, and of course, meeting Heather, and being with my beloved friend, Jody Evans. And, you know, it was just like this, a circle of extraordinary women whose voices have been sent upon this earth in our time. And I feel that we're at an inflection point right now. And I don't want to miss the opportunity. And as I said to Joanna, I'm sure Joanna is the eldest among this community. Maybe Dekila is the youngest. Joanna, I think, how old are you, Joanna, now? How young?
She's 91.
91.
Yes.
91 years old. Okay, you are the embodiment of what I hope my future will be. I truly hope that is the case, that Joanna's prophetic voice is reminding us of how important it is to not only practice radical self-care, but also radical transformative action based on love and wisdom. So I want to just, anyway, Jane, I love you. I just have such appreciation for your guts and your tenacity, and also your ability to penetrate again and again into the deep issues of our time. Now, Dekila, my dear Dekila. Oh, and there's Wendy. I want the youngest to speak last. So maybe I'm just going to leap over you for a minute, Dekila. And Wendy, could you offer reflection.
In the great black and bright mirror of Akshobhya that Joanna held up this evening, I'm reminded that we each reflect and magnify one another, and we are not afraid to walk into the darkness, to take the backward step. On the wall behind me, a painting that Mayumi Oda drew on the floor a number of years ago of Black Tara. She had a vision of Black Tara born from a tear falling on the ground. Black Tara standing to serve and remind us, fear not. This vision was in the dark, dark world of a cave where Mayumi sat in meditation, the walls dripping, and she had a vision of the tear of the world falling on the ground and new life coming up. Not a hopeful life, not flat hope. I think of Black Tara facing the black swan tonight and the courage and fortitude that it takes to hold, to stay the course and strengthen moral nerve. And I feel that strengthening, that inspiration and the gratitude. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you. And I'm pretty sure Heather is with her husband and child this evening. So I want to just loop over to you, my dear friend, Dekila, and ask you for a final reflection.
I am so used to now being middle-aged that to go back to being the youngest is wonderful. I think if there is a word that's come up the most for me during this entire day, there are few words, but the word that really has resonated is the word courage. There isn't a woman that has spoken that hasn't had to have it in sheer tonnage to get through life, to stand up, to become an activist, to become a leader, to decide they're going to be a faith leader, to be a writer, to talk about hope, to create an entire 4-decade history and tradition, that legacy you can pass on to the next generation. And so to me, the thing that binds us all right now is courage. And then the other thing I think of automatically is from the indigenous traditions, it is kinship. And how close that is to kindness, how close those two words are to each other. And here we are, all of us who could just walk by each other on the street and not know we have anything in common. And here we are, all of us bound by kinship because we are choosing to do our work from a place of love and gratitude for the earth, for life, for existing in this time, for being willing to face Akshobhya, as Joanna said. And we do it because we are grounded and need each other. We need each other. We need to remind each other that it always has to come from a place of compassion, because it's so easy to give in to anger. It's so easy to give in to despair and to despondence. But here we are as a kinship, as a circle, all the thousands of people that were watching all day long, we are all here as part of this big circle. And if there is one thing I want to say, it's that, you know, I come from a matrilineal culture, and it's always about the great circle of sisterhood. And it doesn't matter how old we are or how young we are all sisters at the end, lifetimes through lifetime. So thank you.
And we got a note from Heather. She said she's listening and loving while bathing my little one. How utterly perfect. So I want to just once again note that the voices that have been sent today are all coming from women. A woman from Sikkim, another from India, an Afro-American woman, a woman who was born and raised in Costa Rica, and then, you know, us other ladies, so to speak. But we have something in common, and that is that we have what is called moral nerve. We have that capacity to live to the extent that we're able in alignment with views and values that are based in a vision of peace and of non-harming, but also of tenaciousness and courage toward the good in this world. And I would also suggest that the women in this circle have another quality, and that is the capacity for great moral sensitivity. And that the combination of moral nerve and moral sensitivity, our ability or your ability to actually perceive the contours of goodness, but also the contours of harm, and to enter into the stream of society as people who are dedicated, women who are dedicated to transformation, and who have the quality of heart that has us show up again and again, no matter how complex the circumstances. And we have said that, and we've noted that what is so remarkable is that we share a kinship, not only as women, and there have been many comments actually shared with me about the quality of our interactions with each other, where there's a great deal of difference in our styles, in our backgrounds. By the same token, we hold each other's back. There's an absence of competition. There's an openness and curiosity that each of us has manifested in relation to the other. And there's been not only respect, but there's been integrity in this circle. So I thank you. It has been a long day for certain parts of our anatomy, but on the other side, we're a tenacious group, and we have sat through meetings that are a lot less interesting than this one. And I think we all have benefited from the time we have actually offered to each other and the bearing witness that we have done with and through each other. And as we began this time together, I shared the verse of atonement that we offer in the morning as we are putting on our robes as priests. That verse, I'll remind you, for those of you who are not here, it goes, all my ancient twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born of body, speech, and mind, I now fully atone. And that verse reminded me of some words by the wonderful storyteller, Terry Tempest Williams. She wrote, a good friend of mine said, you are married to sorrow. And I looked at him and said, I'm not married to sorrow. I just choose not to look away. You are invited to stand in circle with these women today and not to look away, to look at the truth of suffering, at also the great possibility for us to transform that suffering into wisdom in our time. And we end our day as Buddhists in this particular temple with something called the night chant. And that night chant is preceded by the 4 vows of the Bodhisattva. And I want to share both with you now to conclude our time. The 4 vows are, creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. And then the night verse. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken, awaken. Do not squander your life. Thank you for your life. Thank you for doing whatever you can to protect the many and the varied. Thank you, Joanna, our elder, for being in our midst and teaching so brilliantly. Christiana, for being a bridge between countries and worlds. Dearest Rebecca, a prophetic voice of hope. Krite, thank you. You are someone who has been on the journey of the virus, and you have sent your voice, even though your lungs were so compromised for so many months. Dekila, standing with you. Just, Diana, I remember you and I kind of mentoring Dekila into handling the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala so many years ago. And you have become our mentor, dear Dekila. Stephanie, so much love for your depth and your realization as a living embodiment of deep ecology. Beloved friend Wendy, planting so many gardens and standing alongside so many children and elders, bringing the poetry of the seeds and the plants, of the squashes and the corn. Jane, thank you. Being my friend, but also standing up in the face of tsunamis of criticism, tsunamis of objectification, and always stepping into the future of love and courage. And Diana, your facts give life to our movement. Science is not to be ignored. Thank you for the diligent, painstaking, unbelievably detailed work of unpacking this travesty that we find ourselves in, and also revealing a possible path forward. My friends, deep gratitude, and also to the translators, how they kept our comet moving through the sky of these hours, word after word. I am so grateful. And to our wonderful Gustavo and Niakara and our friends in Spain and Brazil, thank you for making this possible. And Noah, every detail you're on top of. Thank you. Thank you for your life. Thank you for your practice. And thank all of you for your dedication. Our evening is complete. We are free to put our head on the pillow, but tomorrow morning is a new day and our work is cut out for us. Noah G, do you want to have the last word, please?
Just deep gratitude for all of you and for everyone that worked to bring this about. We have 10 people on the screen, plus me, and another 10 people that are supporting and interpreting. And I don't know if they want to join us because it's 5 a.m. in Spain. And I'm not sure what time in Brazil.
Yes.
Hi, Maria Ho. How many hours today? Thank you. Hi, Leah from Brazil. Oh,
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much.
And you. And you.
Mm.
Matilda.
And
Oh,
Jean.
Jeannie. Pollyanna.
Matilde.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Such a beautiful day. Thank you.
And for everyone who, if you missed any part of today, we've already got most of the videos up. Hi, Gustavo, the great
Bravo.
mastermind. I'll post the link for the videos for today, and Gustavo and I believe Fabio will be getting the Spanish and Portuguese translations up soon too, so you can check all those out. We'll also have most of the Q&A that Kriti and Diana and other people were behind the scenes answering questions, and some other questions that will all be on the resources page, along with a lot of other links and slides, and just a wealth of information that will take a long time to get through, but well worth our time. And for all this freely offered, if you would like to make a donation, please click on the link I'm about to post, and to continue supporting Upaya and the work of all these bodhisattvas moving forward.
And just to know that this resource page with all the Zoom videos and the incredible resources that our Circle of Women have made available to us, the registration is free, as you know. And so we are keeping that registration available for the rest of the year, so that people can access this incredible body of resources and continue the practice with this circle. So thank you. And in a way, this circle feels like part of Joanna's great journey. Okay, thank you, Gustavo. Adios. Obrigado.